Hey, we're live, so let's act like it. Good to see you. Glad you're here tonight. It is Wednesday, last I checked, and we'll be for a few more hours, so let's enjoy it. Jump back into Genesis, and let's have a good time with it. Just a couple of announcements. This week is Easter, and so Friday, we're having a Good Friday service on Friday, 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Hope you'll plan on being here for that. Easter Sunday morning, we're having two services, one at 8:30 and one at 10:30. And as I announced previously, the reason is just for space. I'm not sure how many people we're going to have, but normally Easter's a bigger day, and we want to open some space up. And so as much as I think the church is an assembly, as in one gathering, we're going to make an exception this week and have two gatherings, one at 8:30, one at 10:30. Feel free to come to either. If you invite some friends, there should be plenty of space. And so that'll be Sunday, 8:30 and 10:30, all right? I think that's all the announcements I have. Oh, the book reading groups, how to enjoy reading your Bible. Keith Farron. Sign up for that. It is on the home page now of the Church Center app on your phones, and so you can sign up for that. And again, there's three options. You can meet face-to-face, breakfast, room at the church, room in your house, wherever you want. You can meet face-to-face to talk about it. You can do online chat, where like a chat group where you can just type out your messages, and that's a little more flexible in terms of time. There's a third option. You can do online like video chat, like Zoom or something like that. So there's three options. And so if you're interested in getting involved in one of those book groups, this is an excellent book, a great way. It's really kind of foundational, how to enjoy reading your Bible. And so it'd be a great thing for you. At the end of each chapter, there are some questions, and there's a little kind of process we're going to go through and ask people to highlight about three statements that were really significant to you. To answer, be prepared to talk about one or two of the questions and just kind of kick ideas around. So I'm looking forward to these. I hope you'll get involved in one. If you have any questions about that, see me. Email me, whatever, Pastor Stephen, Pastor Jerry. We'll get you connected with all the information you need. On the sign-up on Church Center, you can check a little box to say order me a book, and we'll order that for you, and then it'll come in here at the church, and we get that, and you can pay it here at the church, right? So plan on being a part of those, all right? And having said all that, I think that's all the announcements. So I'm going to stop announcing. I'm going to pray and jump back into Genesis, all right? Father, give us a good time together tonight as we return to your word in the book of Genesis, the beginning, and talk about the things that you have done and are doing, how we understand the world that we live in. Give us understanding of it. Give us a heart to accept it and to see how your word shapes everything about the world that we live in. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we are back in Genesis, and we are way behind the schedule I anticipated. I don't know why I keep anticipating schedules, because I never seem to stick to any schedule. All right, but hey, I'm going to be here anyway, so we'll just keep going. We're taking some extra time in these early chapters of Genesis because, as I said, Genesis is so foundational to everything else. How did the world get the way it is? And the answer to Genesis explains it. Why is there a world at all? Why are there people in the world? Why are there animals and trees? Why is there sin and brokenness in the world? Why are there families? Genesis explains it all. And if you don't have Genesis, you don't have any, I think, good explanation. By explanation, I don't mean you don't have theories about origins, how things came to be. I mean, you don't have a moral explanation. All right, what's the moral explanation? Why is there evil in the world? Genesis explains that. Okay, so the reason why we've taken a little bit more time, and tonight I think we'll pick up the pace after this. Of course, I've been saying that for a few weeks, so don't believe me on that one either. But hopefully we'll pick up the pace. But I want to get tonight to Genesis chapter 9. The flood is over. At the end of Genesis chapter 9, Noah and the ark empties out. Noah builds an altar to Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. Noah builds an altar to the Lord and offers offerings to it. The Lord smells the aroma. The Lord says to himself, and by the way, that smelling of the aroma, there's something in Scripture, just a brief explanation, that from time to time you'll see things like God smelled something, God's his arm is strong. The eyes of the Lord are running to and fro throughout the whole earth, as the King James Version said. You have these things, and we understand God is a spirit and does not have a body like man. And that's one of those catechism questions I just remember from the time I was in first grade. What is God like? God is a spirit, does not have a body like man. It just kind of flows off the tongue after a couple of years. It still comes back to me. And so, we see God is a spirit, so what does it mean when God has eyes? Does a spirit have eyes? Not really. God has an arm. God smells things. What does this mean? There's this way that God communicates with it, and it's called, here's the kind of word we use. God takes human characteristics so that you and I can understand, just so we can kind of understand what he's like. So don't imagine here God has a nose, and he's actually like you outside by the barbecue, like, I like the smell of that burger or that steak. That's not what this is. This is an image that God uses as that smoke goes up, that aroma to God, in a sense, is a reminder of God, a pleasing thing to God, because God is having the worship that Noah is giving to him. All right, and so as God says, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil, I will never again destroy every living thing. Now, remember I said, for the intent of man's heart is evil in verse number 21. The idea there is, even though the intent is evil, I'm not going to destroy it again. Okay, so go back to Genesis 6. Every intent, every thought of the heart was only evil continually, and God destroys it with a flood. You come out of the flood a year later, 374 days later, the ark opens up, 8 people pile out of the ark, and freedom again. And guess what? Man hasn't changed. Man is still sinful. But God is saying, even though man's intent is still sinful, I'm not going to destroy it again in that way. All right, so while the earth remains, seed time, harvest, cold, heat, summer, winter, day and night shall not cease. And when we jump into Genesis chapter 9 with something that is called the Noahic covenant. The Noahic covenant. Now, what is a covenant? All right, a covenant is some type of legal commitment beyond what might be normally construed from a typical conversation. Now, that's kind of what you might say, man, that's a pretty rough definition. All right, it is, but here's the thing, is that we can talk about a covenant, and in theological circles, some people, there's theological nerds out there, and they get really bent out of shape. Covenant's not a contract. Okay, something. I get all that. There's a lot of ins and outs of how we specifically define it, but here's what a covenant is not. A covenant is not you and me sitting around saying, yeah, I'll do that for you, and then I don't do it. It's something beyond a typical conversation. There is a sort of legal commitment or a binding commitment that is made. So here's another way to follow up on that. It involves two, and I know a lot of words, I get it, all right? It involves two or more parties that come together to make a contract agreeing on promises, stipulation, privileges, responsibilities. In political context, it's a treaty. In a social context, it's a lifelong friendship. That's not so much a formal type of thing, but just the relationship we have. We're just committed to one another, right? It's a word used for a marriage relationship, a marriage covenant. We still use those terms today for it. So it's a firm, solid commitment about it. It is something, interestingly, a covenant in the Old Testament is something that is cut. So if you, and this doesn't come out as much in English translations, but the actual Hebrew is you cut a covenant. Now, probably there's a little bit of debate about why that is, but most people seem to agree that the connection of the cutting of a covenant refers to the use of animals in forming the covenant. All right, so when you would form a covenant, there would be an animal, and you would sacrifice that animal. You would cut it. And that would be a symbol or a symbolic demonstration of a commitment that would say, if I don't carry out this covenant, may this happen to me. All right? And so there's a number of different ways. We'll actually look at it later on in Genesis. God cuts a covenant with Abraham and uses animals to do so. All right, so it's probably a sort of, may this happen to me if I break the covenant, the promise I'm making to you. All right, so my encouragement to you with covenant is don't get bound up in, kind of thoughts about the technicalities of. Understand, it is a promise that parties make to each other, and it's a serious promise. There are basically 3 types of covenants. Now, again, the reason I'm going through this is because I think it's helpful to understand the Bible, because there are covenants in the Old Testament. And now that I'm about halfway into this, I'm thinking I may have this out of order. But, hey, whatever. I'll change it next time I teach this, all right? There is what's called a parity covenant. A parity covenant is when 2 equals make promises. And so that's the 2 arrows. They're equal to each other, all right? It's a parity covenant. 2 people, bilateral, 2 parties of equal stature, all right? The contrast to that, or at least one contrast to that, is what is called a suzerainty treaty. Now, what you notice is this is one over the other, all right? Somebody who is higher and somebody who is lower, and the higher one is a bigger arrow because they have more power. The lower one is a smaller arrow because they have less power. This would be the kind of treaty, for instance, that might be like a lord and a servant, a master and a servant. All right, listen, I will provide you a house and food, clothes. I'll take care of your family as long as you work for me and carry out tasks. All right, now, the lower relationship in that, maybe we might call the inferior relation, not an inferior person, okay, because all people are equal in terms of the image of God, but the inferior relationship, the servant, all right, he doesn't have the same power. But the guy, it's sort of, we would think of it like in a sense, maybe similar to an employment kind of situation, not entirely identical, but similar to that. If you come work for me, I will give you a check. Guess what? If you don't come work for me, guess what? You don't get the check. All right, that's how a suzerainty treaty works. If you do this, I'll do this. If you don't do this, I'm not going to do that. Okay? The third kind of treaty in the ancient Near East is called a promissory covenant, or sometimes called a royal land grant. Now, notice there's only one arrow. Why? It's unilateral, right? It's unilateral. One person makes a promise, and there are no conditions on the other person. I'm going to do this for you no matter what you do. Okay, now you see those 3 kinds of covenant: parity, 2 equals, a suzerainty, a superior and an inferior relationship, and then a promissory covenant, 1 person. That's all it is. Now, why does this matter? All right, there are 5 Old Testament covenants typically. All right, I would say there are 5 of them. All right, the first one I'm going to talk about is the Noahic covenant. By the way, when I talk about covenants, I'm talking about things the Bible actually calls a covenant. Some people, well, there was a covenant with Adam. I don't think the relationship God had with Adam was called a covenant. Now, it may have been kind of like that, but it's not what it's called. I'm using places where the Bible actually calls it a covenant. The Noahic covenant, the one we're talking about now, what kind of covenant is this? Genesis chapter 9, we're going to look at it in a few minutes. It is a promissory covenant. God says, this is what I'm going to do. All right, there's no kind of requirements on Noah really to speak of. Right? There is the Abrahamic covenant. Covenant God made with Abraham, Genesis chapter 12, 13, 15, and 17. This is a promissory covenant. What did Abraham have to do? Nothing. God said, I'm going to do this. And in fact, in Genesis 17, God puts Abraham in a deep sleep. He takes animals, he cuts the animals, and God walks down the middle of them, between them. Ordinarily, remember I said cutting a covenant involved animals? Ordinarily, 2 people would walk between them as kind of a symbolic formalization of the covenant, saying, I'm going to walk through this with you, and if I break the covenant, may this happen to me, and if you break the covenant, may this happen to you. And God walks down that aisle between the parts of the animals all by himself, because Abraham has no part in the covenant. It was God. It was a promissory covenant. All right? The Mosaic covenant. Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Starting really in Exodus chapter 19, Israel at Sinai. Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments is the first part of the Mosaic covenant. It continues after that all through Exodus. Leviticus has a lot of it. Deuteronomy, remember Deuteronomos, the second giving of the law. So Deuteronomy is in a sense kind of a repetition of Exodus. This is one that is somewhat disputed. What kind of covenant is this? All right? There's a sense in which it is a unilateral covenant. an unconditional, and sometimes we use conditional, unconditional to describe this. So a parity treaty is conditional. You do this, I'll do this. A suzerainty treaty is conditional. You do this, I'll do this. A promissory covenant is unconditional. Doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to do this. What is the Mosaic covenant? All right, some people believe the Mosaic covenant is unconditional. All right, God gives them a law and says, if you keep the law, I will bless you. If you disobey the law, I will curse you. There's no conditions on that. This is what's going to happen. Now, the other way to look at it is the blessings are conditional. All right, I will bless you if you keep it. If you don't keep it, I'm not going to bless you. In fact, I'm going to curse you. Now, I call it here a suzerainty treaty because I think God is clearly superior, right? He's the master of the world. He's the creator of the world. You don't get more superior than that. There's not another level above God. So every covenant God makes ultimately is with somebody inferior to God. All right. The people of Israel are the other party. And the people of Israel in Exodus chapter 20 say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And that theme is carried on several times as God gives a law. The people of Israel, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will accept this covenant. Okay, so it's kind of a suzerainty treaty. God is saying, I will do this if you do that. And the people are saying, I will do this so that you do that. All right? The fourth covenant is called the Davidic covenant. 2 Samuel chapter 7, God makes a promise to David. One of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. As long as there's a throne in Israel, one of your descendants is going to sit on it. And that is ultimately realized in what? The Messiah, right? Christ, the son of David, who will sit on the throne of David, his father. So the Davidic covenant is a promissory covenant. What did David have to do? Just have children. That's all he had to do, right? You have to have sons if one of your sons is going to sit on the throne. Beyond that, it was God. Right? God was the one that was taking care of that. The last covenant is called the New Covenant, Jeremiah chapter 31. It's also a reference to in Ezekiel 36, I believe. And this is really an end-time covenant. Now, there's some debate about that. So some of you, if you're kind of doing some theological reading and that kind of stuff, what is the New Covenant? I think the New Covenant's in the future. Now, some people think the New Covenant's now. Let's have that debate, but let's have it later because I got Genesis 9 to get to. Now, here's the point of the New Covenant. God says there are days coming I will write, when I will make a covenant with them, a new covenant, not like the covenant I made with their fathers when they left Egypt, when I led them out of Egypt by then, a covenant which they broke, even though I was a father to them. I'm going to make a new covenant. I'm going to write a new law. I'm going to give them a new heart. I'm going to write the heart on the law. I'm going to write the law on the heart. All right, I think it's a promise in time of Israel. That new covenant is still coming. All right, now, 5 covenants, all of them have this kind of relationship. Now, notice which kind of covenant's missing. The parity covenant, right? The parity treaty. Why? Because who's on par with God? Who would God make a parity treaty with? There's nobody. All right, so these other covenants are like that. Okay, so that is the kind of covenants. Now, let's jump in now to the actual Noahic covenant. Look at Genesis chapter 9, and let's jump into this. Let's begin in verses 9 and 10. I know that's not the beginning, but it's going to be the beginning for my list. All right, verses 9 and 10. I myself do establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth is with you. Out of all that comes out of the ark, every beast of the earth. The covenant with Noah, the Noahic covenant, is made with both humans and animals. It's really a covenant with creation. God is making certain promises with respect to not just humans, but the rest of creation as well. All right? Look back at verse number 1. God blessed Noah, his sons, and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Does that sound familiar? All right, that's Genesis 1, right? That's the creation mandate. Look down at verse number 7. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it. So the Noahic covenant reiterates the creation mandate from Genesis 1. God created a man, placed him in there, in the garden, placed him on earth, gave him certain commands, be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth. And that, by the way, that's coming up as well. So really, the Noahic covenant is a restatement of the creation mandate that God gave. All right, look at verse number 2. The fear of you and terror of you will be on every beast of the earth, every bird of the sky, everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. given. All right? So now what's going to happen is the relationship between man and animals is going to change in several different ways. The first is fear. Now animals are going to be afraid of man. You know, I'm not a great outdoorsman. Most people say that if you don't mess with animals, typically they won't mess with you. Right? A snake probably isn't all that interested in you unless you corner it and kind of put it in a threatening situation. I was listening to something on the radio the other day. I don't even know what it was. Oh, no, it wasn't a radio. It was a podcast. I was listening to. They were talking about bears, which was totally odd for this particular podcast to be talking about bears. But they were talking about, you know, what do you do when a bear comes and different options. You know, you go back and forth. But as a general rule, animals are scared of people. All right, that's just the way, you know, that was one of the changes of it. Verses 3 and 4. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I've given all as I gave the green plant. All right, so notice what changes. In Genesis 1, I've given you every green plant for food. I am so glad that I live after Noah. All right, now, the people before Noah, they wouldn't know what they were missing. All right, because they never did. All right, but now he said, now I'm giving you the animals as food. Now, the stipulation on it is, in verse number 4, only you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is, its blood. All right. So what you have in the Noahic covenant is really, and this covers the next several points that will come up here, is there's an honoring of life. Now, as the world is going to increase, and the population is going to increase again, God is instituting some kind of new something for the honoring of life. It starts with animal life. You honor animal life by not eating the flesh with its life in it, that is, its blood. Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood. When Jesus said, we're coming up on Good Friday, crucifixion, and Easter, right? Jesus had to shed his blood, right? Why? The answer is because the life of the flesh is in the blood. When the blood runs out, what leaves with it? The life, right? The lifeblood flows out. Your life is leaving the body. You can't live without blood. Okay? And if you lose too much of it, I mean, you run into serious medical problems. And so life is in the blood. So what God's doing is saying, you can eat animals, but don't eat them live. Now, most of you don't struggle with that, right? I certainly don't. I mean, I like a good medium rare steak, on the rare side of medium rare. All right, juicy, but the life is gone. Nobody looks at that prime rib or that ribeye or whatever it is, that T-bone, and says, hey, that thing's still alive. You know, it's just barely dead. It's moving a little bit, but the life flesh don't eat the blood. Okay? This comes up again, by the way. Anybody know where this comes up again in the Bible? Acts 15. The Jerusalem Council. And the question in Acts chapter 15 is, how much do Gentiles have to become like Jews to be Christians? And the answer they decide on is not much. Staying from fornication, from idols, and from things strangled, and from blood. In other words, and that was a big debate, because there are a lot of people in the early church in Acts who, we'll admit Gentiles can be saved, but if they're going to really get saved, they need to come over here and conform to a Jewish way of living, to Jewish culture and Jewish laws and Jewish regulations. And that's what the Jerusalem Council was about. And I put the question just by, hopefully in ways of helping you remember, how much do Gentiles have to become like Jews to be Christians? And the answer is not much. There's very few stipulations, but one of them is honor life by not eating animals that still have blood in them. All right? The next thing is verse number 5. Surely I'll require your lifeblood from every beast I'll require it. So if an animal kills a human, God requires the lifeblood of that animal. Okay? And by the way, we typically do that now, right? If a dog bites a person, there's a really good chance that dog's going to get put down. That's why, because we understand this principle, okay? It moves on, though, just from animals. And from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God, he made man. So human life is honored by capital punishment given to humans. Should have an S on the end of that. All right, now, here's a question for you. Remember, Cain killed Abel. All right, what was the response? Okay, God put a mark on Cain, right? And what was the mark for? So that no one finding him would kill him. All right? So when Cain kills, God puts a mark on him so that people would not kill him. Now, it's almost as if God flips it around and says, we're changing the way we do things now. Now, the responsibility to honor life is going to be given to fellow humans. Now, some of you might be familiar with this term dispensationalism. All right? I am broadly speaking a dispensationalist. Now, what that means is essentially that God works with people at different times in different ways in human history. Okay? It's relatively uncontroversial, but it's really controversial. All right? The fact of the matter is that at this point in human history, they don't have a lot of revelation. Right? They're operating on limited revelation. And so God holds them responsible for the revelation he's given them up to that time. The revelation he's given them up to this time does include a lot of other stuff. Many dispensationalists see this as the institution of human government. All right, so in your typical, if you're into this, you've seen them on TV. There's some people famous for big charts on the back of the platform. All right, they would see this as the beginning of the dispensation of human government. I can take that or leave it. All right, I'm not going to die on that hill. There's a lot of hills out there, and I only got one life, so I'm going to pick the hills I die on carefully. That's not going to be one of them. But I do think there is a place where God here is changing the way. So previously with Cain, God says, I'm going to deal with Cain. I'm going to take care of that situation. Now, God is giving it to humans. That in human society, there's going to be some sort of hierarchical structure that's going to have a responsibility for justice, particularly in the animals, particularly in the life of animals. Now, notice how there's a difference between animals and man here. What do you get if you kill an animal? Dinner, right? What do you get if you kill a person? The death penalty. Justice, right. All right, see, there's a difference between man and animals. All right, which one of the implications of this is that humans are not just the next step on the evolutionary ladder. Right? Because there's no reason to make this distinction. What happened between that highest form of animal life that all of a sudden, boom, all of a sudden, click, whatever, where we just jumped the line into humanity. This very distinction indicates this was a divine order, that animals and humans are different. All right? We're not just another animal. All right? Now, when we talk about this issue of capital punishment, it's a bit of a difficult one. All right, so let's we are pro-life. I am pro-life. The church here, and I think Christianity is pro-life. If somebody's not pro-life, assuming that they have a reasonable amount of biblical education, and by pro-life I'm referring to abortion and euthanasia, right? Both the beginning and the end. So we talk about pro-life, honoring life, and I would say if somebody claims to be a Christian, they're not pro-life, we need to do some digging on that. Okay, we need to dig down and find out, what's going on. I do think there are some people who just haven't thought through some issues. It's entirely possible. Remember the case a few years ago, the famous case of Terri Schiavo. Remember that? The lady was in what was called a persistent vegetative state. And they wanted to pull the plug, so to speak. And there was a big hullabaloo about that. All right, now, that's a pro-life issue, but how so? I'll take a risk tonight on Wednesday and for all of you who are here and take a risk and say, I don't think that was as clear cut as some people mean. Because what was happening, I mean, here's one of the things when people get to the end of life, and this is the issue with euthanasia. Do we take active steps to end life, or do we not take active steps to continue it? Is there a place to say, you know, we're going to let nature run its course? The doctors say, hey, we've done everything we can do. Listen, with medical technology today, we can keep people alive indefinitely. Just plug them in, hook them up. So as long as there's power, they're going to be alive in some sense. Okay? We can do that for a long time. While I think a pro-life position means we do not take steps to end life, we are not required necessarily to take steps to prolong life. So, somebody comes down with a terminal illness. And, you know, what do? Do we have to take in order to be pro-life, do we have to take every possible medical step to be pro-life? I don't think we do. Now, I do think we cannot prematurely take steps to end it, which is a euthanasia. Now, how does that apply to capital punishment? Because here's the question. People say this all the time. You know, if you're pro-capital punishment, if you're in favor of capital punishment, you're not pro-life. And I would actually ask this question. How can you be pro-life if you're not pro-capital punishment? And here's the example I would use. What is justice look like when you take a human life? So here's the example I use from time to time. Let's say somebody comes to your house at night and steals your car. I know some of you stealing your car, like, not a big deal, right? Other people like, hey, that's my brand new car. All right, so I don't know where you're at in that, but here's what I know. Somebody rolls up to your house and steals your car, you're probably going to be a little bit bent out of shape about that. And they take it out and take it to a chop shop and you know, piece it all out. And then they catch up, and the police catch them, and they come to your house and say, you know, I stole your car. Here's $1 to make up for it. Every single one of you would be like, no, my car's worth more than $1. All right? You took my car, it was worth more than $1. It's not just to give me less than what the car was worth. What is human life worth? What's the appropriate restitution for human life? God says it is a life for life. It's the legal principle that's known as lex talionis, for those of you that are in the Latin. All right? But it's the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, arm for an arm, life for life. Right? It's a just payment. Now, here's the problems with it. Okay? I think if you're pro-life, you have to be pro-capital punishment. I don't think that means that there's no call for mercy in capital punishment. Okay? It does mean that the human government must recognize and honor the sacredness of human life. Now, here's where it becomes an issue. And here's where I have a really strong theological position, and my kind of practical outworking of that in civil life is a little bit different. Because I don't know that there are 12 people in this world that I want to put my life in the hands of. Okay? And that's called a trial by jury, right? I mean, 12 people. I like all y'all here. I do. But I'm not sure I want even 12 of you sitting on my jury. And not because of you, but because, prosecution and people who, Okay, so here becomes the issue. If we're going to enact capital punishment, we need to be really, really, really sure. One of the interesting things, if you've ever read it, or if you haven't read it, you should look into it, called the Innocence Project. It's fascinating. Started out at University of Michigan Law School, I believe. People on death row, and it seems like every few months you see another news article about somebody who's been on death row for X number of years. And they come up with evidence that disproves it. And oftentimes it's evidence that was known at the time, but was not made available in discovery, was not used, things like that. There was a case this week, news story I read just in the last day, maybe yesterday on Tuesday, I read this article where this guy told a lie that put a man in prison for over 2 decades, I think 22 years. And the guy said, finally, I can't live with the lie anymore. Now, what happens if that's capital punishment and somebody lies? And the guy says, I didn't do it. And he knows he didn't do it, but somebody lied, and nobody knows he lied. So, there's a whole lot of issues that go into that. So, in principle, we honor life by being pro-capital punishment, but we need to be sure. And the Bible gives some instructions on how we handle these legal matters. You know, the 2 or 3 witnesses, which means you're supposed to be sure. This is not one person rolls up and says he did it. You got to go through the process. Okay, so we need to be sure on that. We need to be really, really sure. Okay, number 7, part of the Noahic covenant. By the way, verse number 6: whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made man. The reason why it matters is humans are in the image of God, animals are not. All right, when you stamp out the image of God, there's a higher price than when you stamp out dinner. Right? There's just a higher price for it because it's in the image of God. And all humans are in the image of God. Right? All right, let's go on. Number 7. Part of the Noahic covenant is destruction will never come by flood again. Verse number 11, I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood, neither shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. All right, now what God is promising here is not that he's never going to destroy the earth, right? It's about the method by which he's going to destroy the earth. It's never going to be by flood. Now, here's what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3. He talks about those mocking mockers who come in the last day. Say, where is the promise of his coming? All things continue just as they have since the foundation of the world. And he says, when they maintain this, it escapes their notice. I like the King James here. They are willingly ignorant. They're not only dumb, they're willfully dumb. Willfully ignorant. That by the word of God, the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. That's creation, Genesis 1, right? Through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. But by his word, the word that created it and the word that destroyed it the first time, by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire for the day of judgment and destruction of godly men. All right, so again, what is the historical basis for a judgment to come at the end of the world? The answer is that judgment already came in the flood. And so Peter makes a connection that God created the world. He destroyed it by water, his word, by word he ordered the destruction of it by water. And that word that created, the word that destroyed it once, that word is preserving it for a future judgment, but it's not going to be by flood, it's going to be by fire. Okay, so that's part of the Noahic covenant. And then verse number 12 through 17, the bow in the sky is a sign of the covenant. That God says, when I see this bow, in my bow in the cloud, it'll be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. I'll bring a cloud, the bow will be seen in the cloud. I'll remember my covenant, which is between you and me. Now again, the idea of remembering is not like God forgets things. Okay, that's not the point. God's like, I was getting ready to destroy him, and I saw that rainbow in the sky. Guess I won't do that today. That's not the point. All right, the point is that it's just a figure of speech for us to understand that the rainbow means something. That it's a reminder of God that in the aftermath of the rain is not destruction. The aftermath of the rain, no matter how hard it rains, it'll stop because it's not going to destroy everything. And that's a reminder of God's promises. So the bow is the sign of his promise. All right, that's the Noahic covenant. Now, let's move on then to verses 18 and following. We're not going to dig deep into this. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Those are the 3 sons of Noah that come off the earth. There's this awkward kind of situation where Noah gets drunk. Something happens in the tent. We don't know what it is. The Bible doesn't say. Verse number 20, Noah began farming, planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine, became drunk, uncovered himself inside the tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it both on their shoulders, walked backward, and covered the nakedness of their fathers. Their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. Okay, now here's the question. There's a lot of, what ifs, and people made all kinds of stuff up about this, and the bottom line is we don't know exactly what happened. All right, something happened while Noah was drunk. Ham saw it, comes out, tells the brothers, apparently in a mocking sort of way. That's how I understand this, is that he kind of comes out and usually kind of mock his father. Shem and Japheth, on the other hand, say, no, we're not doing that. They take a covering, a blanket of some sort, and hold it and actually walk backwards so they cannot see, and cover their father up with it to maintain whatever dignity he has left at this point. Now, the result of that is that there is a curse. When Noah woke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Now, again, what had he done? We don't know what he had done. So be careful about reading too much into that. We simply don't know. All right, so cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brother. That's the son of Ham. Ham's the one who sinned. Who gets the curse? The son. All right, now probably because the sins of the fathers are passed down to the children. It's not like Canaan was innocent and God just, rains down judgment for something dad did. Canaan had his own sins. All right? Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be a servant. May God enlarge Japheth. Let him dwell in the tents of Shem. And let Canaan be a servant. Shem is the line from which the Israelites come. All right? And we're not going to dig too deeply into that except to mention those brothers. All right, now, Genesis chapter 10 is what is called the Table of Nations. And what it is just a list of names. I mentioned last week it's another sort of genealogy of sorts, showing connections, but it really lays the groundwork. Verse number 32, these are families of sons of Noah according to genealogies by their nations, and that's why it's called the Table of Nations. And out of these, the nations were separated on the earth after the flood, which raises the question, how were they separated? And that leads us right into chapter 11, which is the Tower of Babel. Some people say Babel, whichever it is. What is this? All right, the whole earth used the same language, same words. As they journeyed east, they found a plain in land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, let's make bricks, let's burn them thoroughly. They used brick for stone, they used tar for mortar. They said, let us build for ourselves a city, a tower whose top will reach into heaven. Let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. There was probably an attempt here to maintain some sort of societal unity. Let's keep everybody here, and let's have this big symbol of our unity, because if we don't, everybody's going to scatter. Now, the idea was let's make a name for ourselves. Sort of ironic. They probably didn't intend the kind of name they ended up with, as the story reveals to us. All right, so the Lord comes down to see the city and the tower which sons of men have built. Now, again, this is don't imagine this as God sitting up in heaven saying, oh, I had no idea. I better go down and check out what those guys are doing. I have no idea. God knows it's an image that communicates to us that God is engaged in the world. God is not just sitting outside the world doing nothing. God is engaged in his world. So he sees this. He says, behold, they're one people. They all have the same languages, what they began to do. Now, nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible. So let's go down there and confuse their language so they will not understand one another's speech. And here arrives in the Bible the division of people by the division of languages. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a foreign country. One of the loneliest times I ever spent in my life was I spent 3.5 weeks in Lithuania in the fall of 1992. Lithuania was a former Soviet bloc country, and I'd gone there on sort of a missions exploration trip. And during the 3.5 weeks I was there, the guy I was with was a native-born Lithuanian. He lived in Germany during the war, World War II, moved from Germany to South America to Chile, I believe, and then ended up in Pittsburgh where he got saved. And it was going back to Lithuania, his hometown, his home country. He spoke 4 or 5 different languages. The worst language we spoke was English. And he was the only one there who spoke English. Everybody else was speaking Lithuanian, so he understood it pretty well, but he struggled. I mean, we were sitting at dinner one time, and and having this kind of conversation, and he couldn't remember the English word for fork. So he's pointing at it. I said, fork. Yeah, fork. He couldn't remember. I mean, so it's lonely. I sat through 2.5-hour church services where I didn't understand anything except the part that I preached. And the rest, I was sitting there just, in 2.5-hour church services. So you get really lonely, and you start to look for people who speak your language. So how did God divide the nations? The answer, He divided their language, and people congregate by the people they can talk to. We have that in our own culture, don't we? You go up in southwest Detroit, what are you going to find? Mexican town. Large Hispanic population. You drive down the streets and they're bilingual, if that. Many of them aren't even bilingual. Just Spanish. Drive up in Dearborn, going to be an Arabic population. All right? Other cities, you got different kind of cultures and ethnicities gather together, and they move there because those are the people who speak their language. All right? That's what happens here. And this is how God scatters people. I can't talk to you anymore. I might as well move over there because I can't talk to you anyway. And this is how God divides the earth. The irony is, the place is called Babel, verse number 9, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad. And so what happens here is God scatters them, and the people of Babel, remember they said, let's make a name for ourselves. And now, who knows how many years later, 3,000, 4,000 years later, they have a name. It's not the one they wanted. It's the generation of people who says, hey, let's build a tower and make sure nobody ever forgets us. And they succeeded in all the wrong ways. We're still talking about them because of their arrogance to think that they could build a tower that would be a lasting monument to them. The tower's long gone. And when I think of a story like this, I think of the poem Ozymandias. Remember that? Shelley, right? Was that Percy Bysshe Shelley, I think? Ozymandias, King of Kings, and built this huge statue. And at the end, the lone and level sand stretched far away because the statue's gone. And here's this Tower of Babel. The tower is long gone. But the lesson is not. Don't unite yourselves together and think you can outdo God. The kings of the earth in Psalm 2, they band themselves together. And the Lord sits in heaven and laughs at them. Because they're not going to succeed. It's not going to matter. And when God laughs at you, you know you're in for trouble, right? That's going to be a bad day. But that's kind of the arrogance, and God addresses that and spreads people out, and the result of that is scattering them around the world. Then in chapter 11, verses 10 and following, the record of the generations of Shem. All right? And what happens there is just, again, years and laying out the pattern of descendants. Is this every single generation? Maybe, maybe not. Again, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Jewish genealogies work in different ways. Sometimes they skip generations because the word father, they don't really, in the Bible, have a term for grandfather. The word father is father. It's also grandfather, be just ancestors. All right. When you come down, then all this is leading down. All these names lead down to verse number 26. Terah lived 70 years and became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. These are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. There's death. Now, you see how this is leading up, because what God's getting ready to do is prepare for the next stage in Revelation, not the book of Revelation, but the process of Revelation. The next stage in human history is when he takes this guy named Abram, who is from Ur of the Chaldees. They take Abram, and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Sarah was barren. She had no child. And they kind of, again, we know the story, right? But imagine reading Genesis for the first time. And you have no idea what's coming in Genesis. And you read this story, Sarah was barren. You think, well, man, that's too bad. But it sets the stage for what's about to come. Terah takes Abram, Lot, Sarai, son, Abram's wife. They went out from Ur of the Chaldees, in the land of Canaan, went as far as Haran and settled there. Days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And what begins in chapter 12 is what we know as the Abrahamic covenant. Now, let me again go back and review the beginning. So you have Genesis 1 and 2 is creation. Genesis 3 through 11 is really the curse, how the curse happens, and then its initial outworkings. Chapter 12 begins a section of Genesis called covenant. And then really Genesis 37 begins a section of Genesis we might label captivity, where Joseph goes to Egypt, and that begins the captivity of God's people in Egypt. Okay, now let me sum all this up this way tonight, and we're not going to launch into Genesis 12. I think next time we'll plan on doing the whole rest of the book of Genesis. All right, we'll try to get through it all. But here's what I want to leave you with tonight. The Noahic covenant explains an awful lot about life in this world. That's why I want to take some extra time. Okay, it explains why human life matters. It explains why human life is different than animal life. It explains the provision. And by the way, the command for capital punishment continues in the New Testament. In Romans 13, when it says the authorities of man does not bear the sword in vain. What do you do with a sword? You kill people with it. And that's in that passage, Romans 13. Let every soul be subject to higher authorities, because every higher authority is from God. And when you resist the higher authorities, the government authorities, you're resisting God. And so there's a lot built into that. And we got to wrestle through some of that. But it says specifically the government is supposed to protect those who do right and punish those who do evil. It does not bear the sword in vain. That's a reference, I believe, to capital punishment. All right, meat. Remember in 1 Timothy, those who forbid to eat meat, it's called the doctrine of demons. All right? I mean, it's right there. So Genesis 9 explains how that gets there. How do we get from Genesis 1, I've given you every green food to eat, how do we get to you can't forbid me from eating meat? Well, Genesis 9, the Noahic covenant, explains that and lays the foundation for these things. It also lays the foundation for the question in 2 Peter chapter 3, where's the promise of his coming? Genesis 9 tells us where the promise of the coming is. All right? The word that destroyed it in the flood is reserving it. Why? Because God said, I will not destroy it again that way. So Genesis 9, again, explains so much of the world. And if we miss these early chapters of Genesis, we're going to miss an awful lot, and we're going to struggle to make sense of the world. So remember, the Bible gives us an explanation for why the world is the way it is. And when we start with the Bible, we have a whole lot easier time making sense of life around us. The reason why so many people struggle making sense of life is because we don't start with the Bible. Which leads me to a commercial to end with. On Sunday, I'm starting a new sermon series called Paradox. When opposites collide. How do we make sense of some things in the Bible that just don't seem to go? They seem totally opposite. So Sunday, dead and alive. We are dead and we are alive. And then we're alive and then we're dead. And how do we understand that paradox in terms of the gospel and the resurrection of Jesus? So I hope you'll be here Sunday for that. By the way, that series will go about 5 weeks long. Invite some friends. I try on Easter Sunday to start a series like this because I think we'll have some guests, and it might be something that God would use to bring them back to here week number 2 as we talk about another paradox. And so be in prayer for that. All right, and come Friday ready to worship in a really what is Friday's going to be a bit of a somber service. Good Friday is not a celebration. Right? Good Friday is Jesus hanging on the cross and him being taken down and put in the grave. It's more like a funeral service. And we want to reflect on the meaning of that for us on Friday nights. Hope you'll be here as we sing together and study together 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock on Friday. And then Sunday morning, we're going to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. He is not here. He is risen. And so let's look forward to a great weekend of worship together. I'm going to pray, and then we'll be dismissed, right? Father, thank you for your word that explains the world so well, explains all these things to us if only we will believe it, if we'll trust what you say. Give us greater understanding. Give us a way to put these things together, to understand the world so that we might live faithfully in it. This world is not our home, and yet it is our home. And so as we live in that kind of paradox that we'll be talking about, I pray that you would give us wisdom to live wisely and righteously in this present age, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed. So go with us tonight. May we love one another, be one church before you in the name of Christ, I pray. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being here. Have a great night, great week. See you Friday, 6 o'clock. By the way, we will be live streaming, so if you want to be online, if you're not comfortable being here in person, I hope you will be, but if you're not, we will be live streaming those, all right? Have a great night.